When the Norman conquest of England was completed, its consequences did not stop at the shores of the British Isles. The events of 1066 were not an isolated transformation, but part of a much wider Norman expansion that reshaped large portions of medieval Europe. To understand the full meaning of Norman power, it is necessary to look beyond England and trace how a relatively small duchy rose to dominate territories stretching from northern France to southern Italy. The Normans were descendants of Viking settlers who had arrived in northern France during the early 10th century. Granted land by the Frankish king in exchange for loyalty and defense, they quickly adapted to the political, religious, and cultural structures of Western Europe. Within a few generations, they became skilled administrators, fierce warriors, and ambitious rulers, combining Scandinavian aggression with Frankish organization. By the 11th century, Normandy was one of the most powerful duchies in France. Its rulers maintained a strong military tradition, relied on cavalry warfare, and enforced a strict hierarchy of loyalty. Norman society was built around the idea that land granted by a ruler carried with it an obligation of service, particularly military service. This system allowed Norman leaders to mobilize large, disciplined forces quickly and efficiently. William of Normandy's conquest of England was the most famous expression of Norman ambition, but it was not unique. Even before 1066, Norman adventurers were carving out territories elsewhere in Europe. Younger sons of Norman nobles, lacking inheritance at home, sought fortune abroad through warfare and service. Their reputation as effective fighters made them highly sought after by rulers across the continent. One of the most remarkable examples of Norman expansion occurred far from northern Europe, in southern Italy. Beginning in the early 11th century, Norman mercenaries entered the region initially as hired soldiers. Southern Italy was politically fragmented, divided among Lombard princes, Byzantine governors, and Muslim rulers in Sicily. This instability created opportunities for ambitious outsiders. Norman warriors gradually shifted from mercenary service to territorial control. Families such as the Hautevilles rose to prominence through military skill and strategic alliances. Through conquest, negotiation, and opportunism, the Normans established control over large parts of southern Italy and eventually over Sicily itself. The Norman conquest of Sicily was particularly significant. Muslim rulers had controlled the island for centuries, creating a sophisticated society with advanced agriculture, trade networks, and urban life. Rather than destroying this system, Norman rulers preserved much of it. They employed Muslim administrators, tolerated religious diversity, and integrated Byzantine and Islamic practices into their government. Under Norman rule, Sicily became one of the most culturally diverse and economically prosperous regions in Europe. Latin Christians, Greek Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived under a centralized monarchy that emphasized stability and taxation rather than religious uniformity. This pragmatic approach to governance distinguished the Normans from many contemporary rulers. Meanwhile, in Northern Europe, William's success in England transformed the balance of power. The English crown became deeply intertwined with continental politics. Norman kings ruled lands on both sides of the English Channel, making England inseparable from conflicts in France. The English monarchy became a transcontinental power, with interests extending far beyond the island itself. Norman influence also spread through marriage alliances. Strategic unions connected Norman rulers to royal families across Europe. These marriages reinforced political ties, secured legitimacy, and expanded networks of influence. Norman power was not built solely through conquest, but through careful integration into Europe's aristocratic system. The Normans were not only conquerors, they were builders. Across their territories, they constructed castles, cathedrals, and administrative centers that reinforced their authority. These structures served both practical and symbolic purposes, projecting dominance while enabling control over land and population. Norman castles were particularly effective instruments of power. Built rapidly and strategically placed, they allowed small garrisons to dominate large areas. Their presence discouraged rebellion and ensured that authority was visible and immediate. From England to Italy, castles became the physical expression of Norman rule. The Norman approach to governance emphasized centralization. Unlike earlier feudal arrangements that relied heavily on local autonomy, Norman rulers sought direct control. They demanded loyalty, collected taxes systematically, and enforced law through appointed officials. This model strengthened royal authority and reduced the independence of local elites. Religion played a key role in legitimizing Norman expansion. Norman rulers aligned themselves closely with the church, sponsoring monasteries, reform movements, and ecclesiastical appointments. Papal support, as in William's invasion of England, provided moral justification for conquest and reinforced the idea that Norman rule was divinely sanctioned. At the same time, Norman rulers exercised significant influence over church leadership within their territories. Bishops and abbots were often chosen for loyalty as much as piety. This blending of religious and political authority strengthened centralized control, but also contributed to growing tensions between secular rulers and the papacy. The Norman presence reshaped Europe's political landscape. Their success demonstrated that relatively small, well-organized forces could overthrow established powers. Their model of governance influenced neighboring states and accelerated the trend toward stronger, more centralized monarchies. By the late 11th century, Norman rulers controlled England, Normandy, southern Italy, and Sicily. Their territories spanned cultures, languages, and religions. Managing such diversity required adaptability, pragmatism, and administrative skill. The Normans proved capable of all three. However, Norman expansion also carried long-term consequences. Their transcontinental holdings created persistent tensions between rulers and regions. Conflicts over loyalty, inheritance, and territory would later erupt into wars that shaped medieval Europe for centuries. The Norman legacy extended far beyond their own dynasty. The institutions they built, the borders they reshaped, and the political models they promoted became foundations for future European states. Their influence can be traced in legal systems, military organization, architecture, and governance. The Normans did not merely conquer lands, they transformed them. Wherever they ruled, they imposed order, extracted resources, and integrated territories into wider political networks. Their success lay not only in force of arms, but in their ability to adapt to local conditions while maintaining centralized authority. By the end of the 11th century, Europe was entering a new phase. Power was becoming more concentrated, borders more contested, and authority more clearly defined. The Norman expansion was a critical catalyst in this transformation. This episode marks the beginning of a broader story. As Norman power spread, it collided with emperors, popes, and rival kingdoms. These tensions would soon ignite conflicts that engulfed the continent, drawing Europe into an age defined by empire, faith, and war. The Normans had shown what was possible. What followed would determine the fate of medieval Europe itself.